Hello and welcome.
This is High Point.
The podcast of the acoustic consultancy at Hallé Crescendo.
At High Point, we talk about public places,
Performance venues,
instruments,
acoustics,
and all things music related.
We are Marc, founder and director of Hallé Crescendo.
And Jake Cotier, co-founder and producer of High Point.
Thanks for tuning in.
And if you enjoy listening to us,
don't forget to like, share and subscribe. Hi Martin, hi Steve, how are you?
Yeah, good, thanks Marc.
Yeah, well, fine, thank you very much. Yeah, good to see you.
Good to see you too. Thanks for having us in the basement of the Hallé St Peters. Can I ask you to introduce yourself, Steve first maybe?
Okay, I'm Steve Pickett, I'm the Education Director of the Hallé. I've been in the role 20 years, this is my 21st year. I'm a musician, so my background on that basis was music degree, postgraduate at the Royal College of Music as a bassoonist. I did some conducting. And then I went to the Ulster Orchestra where I was for 20 years as a second bassoon, principal concert bassoon. Came to the Hallé in 2002 as Education Director, and I've been here ever since. I suppose the main thing I do at the Hallé, other than obviously run that department, is I'm a composer and arranger.
Okay, I was going to ask, do you still have some musical activity?
Yeah, it's mostly writing. I don't play anymore.
Okay.
I've decided that I couldn't keep the standard on that sort of side, so bassoon has been sold. No reed making or anything like that. It's all out of the way. So I do a lot of writing from all sorts of combinations of instruments, from the full orchestra down to duos even. And the basic aim of all that is to bring professional music makers working alongside community members, whether it's a child or whether it's a pensioner or how that works.
Great. Interesting. How about you, Martin?
So my name's Martin Glynn. I'm the Venues Director for the Hallé. So I look after this sort of strategic and operational management of the two venues that the Hallé owns and operates, which are Hallé St Peters, which is the venue we're in at the moment, and sort of our sister venue, which is just around the corner, which is Hallé at St Michael's. Both of those venues are in Ancoats in Manchester. I've been at the Hallé for 18 years. This is sort of my second role within the organisation, having moved from initially working in the sponsorship and fundraising team. And then I moved over when we started the St Peters project to look at the commercial opportunities that owning a venue would bring to the organisation. And so I sort of subsequently have kind of pivoted to then, not only kind of once you get commercial bookings into the space, not just bringing them in, but then also delivering those activities within the building. So that's been my kind of sort of journey within the
That's quite interesting and it's going to be interesting for other episodes and maybe also the audience that we're having, because there's a lot of people we're going to interview or who we have interviewed who are really interested in the financial side of it, how you run a place, but how also you fundraise to build a place or renovate a place. So hopefully you can share some experience in that as well.
Yeah, as best as we're able. I don't think there is a magic booklet of just do this and it'll happen.
Yeah.
Lots of stars have to align. Strategy is important, ambition is important, vision is important.
Yeah.
Connections are important.
I could say Martin's a brilliant networker. Absolutely amazing networker. Martin knows all those connections.
I may need to get some experience in that as well.
Yeah. Well, it's
networking
an important. But I think City of Manchester's a good place to network in. It's a big city, but small enough that you can make an impact.
Especially for music.
Yeah. And there's a genuine kind of I suppose ecology within sort of the music scene in the city that is interconnected. So it doesn't take long to get from one person to the next.
Yeah.
Somebody will know somebody else quite quickly if you need something or indeed they need you. So
which is pretty useful.
Yeah.
And I guess Manchester is still a big city, but you still get that like proximity within the communities and between the communities as well.
Absolutely, yes. That's absolutely the case with with all the sort of education and community work.
Yeah.
You know, we've got those connections in all the main boroughs, if you like, and that we've grown those because it's not too big.
Yeah.
You know, it's been really a useful thing to have.
So, well, good transition. What's the Hallé? The first time I spoke to you, you said it's not the Hallé, it's the Hallé Orchestra Society. Is that right?
Hallé Concert Society.
Concert Society.
Yes.
And when has it always been like this? Has it changed? And
Well-
how did the Hallé start?
Yeah.
Okay, so the potted history of the Hallé, which potted history of 164 years of
Yeah.
history. Well, shall I start, Steve?
You go on, go for
okay,
it.
so the Hallé was founded in Manchester by Charles Hallé, later Sir Charles Hallé, who was German immigrant, came to the UK earlier in the 1800s, and ended up in Manchester in 1857, connected to something called the Arts Treasures exhibition, which took place on pretty much the space where Old Trafford football ground is now, which was a large, well, sort of exactly what it said. It was an exhibition of art treasures of the time, and that was a sort of a full year event. And he was asked to come and pull together the orchestra that would play at the exhibition on a daily basis.
Yeah.
And that meant that he pulled in through his sort of travels through Europe prior to arriving in the UK a very high calibre and high quality orchestral group which would play daily.
I think the other thing about Hallé was he knew the composers of the time.
Yeah.
So he had connections to Liszt, to Chopin, to Berlioz,
Yeah.
to Wagner, and all that sort of thing. So
Yeah.
he was bringing that music to Manchester, to England, to the UK.
Yeah, so at the end of the exhibition, he'd accumulated, this ensemble, and didn't want that ensemble to, just dissipate and go with the exhibition. So he began his own series of concerts, Mr. Charles Hallé's orchestral concerts, which were staged at the Free Trade Hall, the first incarnation of the Free Trade Hall. The first concert being the 30th of January, 1858.
A long time ago.
And the Hallé has been playing continually in the city ever since.
Yeah, I mean, in that first year, I think there were 12 concerts. He made £5,000. That was it.
Yeah.
Basically, there was enough of a calling. And of course, in those days, they were gentlemen's concerts. So ladies weren't allowed. It was just gentlemen's concerts that set the thing off. But as Martin has said, from then it just bloomed.
Well, he kind of introduced, the city was going through a sort of phenomenal economic transformation at that time. It's kind of centre of the industrial world, really, world's first industrial city, and the wealth of the city probably enabled him to kind of begin something, and met sort of sponsors and supporters that kind of backed him in that pursuit. But also, it brought, I suppose, a more Central European element of culture with it. And so he introduced, kind of created the musical life of the city, really, in a way. Not that music didn't exist in the city previously, but kind of, I guess he's, the original concert promoter. He's the original, in a city that's now full of, probably some of the world's biggest pop music concert promoters are based in Manchester. But he was there doing it, and indeed some of the world's biggest bands are out of Manchester. But I always say the original Manchester band is the Hallé. So the orchestra became known as the Hallé Orchestra, Mr. Hallé's orchestra, the Hallé Orchestra, which is unusual because I suppose in other cities it might have been known as the Manchester Manchester Symphony Orchestra. But because he was sort of the pivotal driving force behind it, it became known after him, which makes us unique, I think.
I think you're right, Martin. I don't think there's any other orchestra in the world that's named in a similar way. Let's put it that way.
I don't know any of those.
Yeah. So he lived until
1895.
Yeah.
And then in 1899 they constituted the Hallé Concert Society. It had 50 members to start with, and I did clock up today that currently we have 242 members of the society, and we've had 8 principal conductors or music directors since then. So the Hallé tends to keep their conductors for quite a long time. So the current incumbent, Sir Marc has been at the Hallé since the year 2000.
Okay.
So a long time. Most orchestras, anything between 3, 5, 10 years or whatever, but not to be doing it for that sort of time. So some really notable conductors we've had in the past have been following Hallé was Carl Richter, and Richter knew Wagner. So again, that big European connection, and a lot of that music that had never been performed in the UK before was being brought through the Hallé to Manchester and elsewhere as well, obviously within UK. And probably the most famous conductor we've had in the role was Sir John Barbaroni in 1943, and he sort of rescued the orchestra around the time of the wars and so on. And
arrived to Manchester where there was no orchestra really left.
Yeah,
most of them had gone to serve.
Absolutely, yeah.
In the Second World War, and indeed the Free Trade Hall had been bombed.
Yeah.
So the concert hall didn't exist either. So he kind of came and had to reconstruct.
So it was the conductors who were also the managers managing everything
for a period of time. I think certainly probably from Barbaroli's time onwards there will have been. I mean, I will confess I don't know how the organisation has been constituted in every year of its operation, but certainly by the I guess by the mid-50s there was probably a structure emerging that we would recognise part of now. It was kind of a general manager, a music director, somebody that looked after artistic planning, somebody that help kind of stage manage,
and the
those
marketing
sorts of
side of it all, that sort of thing,
sales and kind of artist liaison and all of those sorts of things that a 21st century orchestra does. And then of course the 21st century orchestra doesn't really look like a 1950s orchestra.
No.
Our activity and indeed our reach is very different, and the way in which we reach people is very different. So I suppose that the great thing about working for an organisation like the Hallé is you become very aware that you are merely a custodian for a period of time. A critical part of your work is to ensure that it's probably healthier than, it's at least as healthy as when you arrived.
Yeah.
You feel that weight of kind of make sure that it's still going. When at whatever time you choose to leave. As you've heard, Steve and I have both been with the organisation for a while, and I think that is indicative of the feel of the place that there is. We quite often talk about the Hallé family, and that isn't that's not just a kind of cheesy kind of title. There is a very familiar or familial feel about the organisation, and that's audience, players, administration. That there are long lasting relationships that come out of the organisation. I think that's what makes it very special. It's the thing that's always appealed to it about me is that a bit like we were talking about sort of the networks of how the musical ecology, but actually I think socially that works in Manchester as well. You kind of it doesn't take long for you to know somebody who knows somebody who knows somebody, and I think those connections often come back. The very broad sort of communities that connect with the Hallé, and I think that's something that people cherish about the organisation.
Yeah,
so they feel part of it, and it feels part of them.
Absolutely. I'm just going to say, because Martin's obviously from Manchester, but I'm not. And coming into the place, taxi drivers, they might not be part of your regular audience or anything like that, but people in shops or whatever, they all know.
Yes.
They've all heard of the Hallé. The Hallé is incredibly well known, and particularly in my world, it does open doors when you're trying to get into certain schools and things like that. But that's really, really special, as Martin said. It's a family.
Yeah.
But it's a family in Manchester, isn't it?
But I would say that we don't take that for granted. Much of what Steve's work particularly is about is making sure that recognition, that cross society recognition continues.
Absolutely.
Long after we've gone. That a big part of what we're trying to achieve, probably, and actually St Peters and Steve's work in education play a part in that, is that that recognition of Hallé and association with the Hallé, that it's something of the city and of for the city.
Yeah.
Is a very I think it's a part of the essence of who we are. So and you know, taking it back to Hallé himself, he was very keen as he developed from you know allowing more than just the gentlemen to come to the concerts, but actually he was very keen from the off that economically people were able to afford. So there was a range of tickets, so that I suppose it wasn't just for the you know, high society, it was for everybody, and you know, music for everybody is I think is at the core of what we do now. So you know, I think
he was a real music educator.
Yeah.
Absolutely, you know, he brought all this music that nobody had ever heard in most cases from Europe, but very much, as Martin said, you know, of those community connections and educating the audience into, you know, you like this, but you might also like this, and that sort of approach in his programming. And that had a massive effect on the whole industry in the way that that's developed over the years. And I suppose the main big changes from what we've been talking about now, in the 1980s, the Arts Council, which has obviously been a big supporter of orchestras across the nation, started to basically look at arts organisations and say, well, look, you're getting all this public money, but you cannot just play to your audience. You've got to have what they called then was outreach. So that's when, you know, we talked about you know, the music directors and the principal conductors and a small team of managers that went with that. That's when things started to broaden in terms of, in a sense, connecting to those that don't come to your concerts.
Yeah.
And that revolution had happened across the country, as I say, in the 1980s, and that's where these education and community programs have come out. So that's where the Hallé means so much more to the region in the way that it works. It's not just, I mean, Martin mentioned the family, Hallé family. Part of that are all the different parts of the Hallé. So we've got the orchestra, we've got the choir that Hallé started at that same time. But also we've got these amazing youth ensembles that come with the package. Again, looking at the future of talent and how we as an organisation can play a big role in the development of that talent. Not only just for our continuation, if you like, but just in the way that might move out into the community in so many different areas. So we've got, you know, Hallé Youth Orchestra, and we've got players that in the orchestra now that have come through those sort of setups. We've got the Hallé Youth Choir.
Yep.
We've got the Hallé Children's Choir. We've got the Hallé Youth Training Choir, and something called the Choral Academy, and that's for singers that want to develop their singing, perhaps not on the edges of coming into the Hallé Choir, but people, local people who want to develop that side, and we provide that, so that talent development. Then, of course, you've got all the education programs.
Well, we mustn't forget our community choir.
And the community choir, yes, of course, Martin, which was a really, really interesting thing. It was started. I was partly involved in the setup, and I went to the very first session. And we had sort of like, you know, 3 people and a dog, and we were sort of thinking, you know, is this actually going to carry on or whatever, you know? So we got this thing going. And how many people do you get now, Martin?
It's sort of 70 regularly.
70 or 80, It's been amazing.
Great.
So that's essentially a singing for pleasure group, and sort of the community element is key to it. And I suppose it's community in both its senses, isn't it? That it is that we draw from the community locally and a bit further afield, but you know, certainly the community of Manchester, Greater Manchester. But also that the choir then becomes a community of its own, and it you know, in these times where perhaps, you know, we talk about social isolation and we talk about, you know, mental health and all of those things, that we've got a group of people who come together, and the pleasure element of singing is absolutely critical. It's not always about the concert platform or the you know, it's about the joy of participation and the joy of singing, and you know, and you know, it must be said, they make a lovely sound too.
Yeah, to combat loneliness. I mean, there's as far as I know, there's 2 members of the choir that have been sort of prescribed by their GPs that they need to come and get involved. Yeah, and so it's part of that, as Martin mentioned, that well-being and you know, mental health contributing to help in that.
So how do you join those groups, all those choirs? Do you have a certain level? Do you have an audition?
So the community choir is completely free access. Just turn up. There is a small charge to come on a weekly basis. What sort of subscription amount? The choral academy is a kind of, as Steve explained, it's kind of like a bit like an evening class in singing. So that's something that people will elect to do to sort of develop themselves as singers. The Hallé choir, the performing choir, the Hallé choir, which, as Steve said, formed around the same time as the orchestra by Sir Charles, that is an auditioned group. And there's a main choir, and then there's some associate members, and they have quite large commitments to kind of perform in each year. We're recording this in December, and they're about to enter into probably their busiest time of year, as they perform several concerts in a very short space of time in the weeks to come. But they're constantly busy, and are the big choral occasions are, for me, very much highlights of the Hallé season, when the choir and the orchestra come together. They may happen sort of 3-4 times a season in addition to the Christmas stuff. So,
and the children get involved in some of those concerts as well, when those semi-choruses and things like that are required for some of the pieces. The youth choir play that role, and then some of the really big symphonies, some of the Mahler symphonies, where you've got a children's chorus actually in it. That obviously the Hallé children's choir plays that role. So
the youth ensembles and the children's choir, they are auditioned groups, but there are no charges to be part of those groups. So my understanding was that sort of in their inception that we wanted to provide the highest quality musical experience for children and young people outside of specialist music colleges. So that if the Hallé Youth Orchestra would be a comparable standard to ensembles that you find within specialist music colleges. So we are very proud of the fact that we, as things stand, and funding is always a challenge, but as things stand, we don't ask for any contributions from those members. That their parents don't pay for them to be part of those groups. The only barrier to entry is aptitude and talent. And we use, as Steve has already pointed out, the opportunities that come from those groups are about development of talent, interacting with the professional side of the organisation, having some master classes, and we provide them with some performance opportunities which they can only get through their association with us, which is really sort of spectacular.
I think the other thing to say about it is that those ensembles are within a wider strategy for the region. So we have 2 education music hubs. We have the Greater Manchester one, which with the Hallé is a strategic partner, and we are delivery partners to the Manchester Youth Hub, and those organisations have their ensembles as well, out in the regions, as it were, across Greater Manchester, and we take children and young people obviously from those groups who then come into the Hallé, our youth ensembles. From that, but it's all part of a system, so that their musical journey would start, say, in a Bolton music service or Oldham music service, whatever the case may be, and we are involved with that development within our work with those music services. But ultimately, one of the interesting ways this works is then some of those children then come into our ensembles and then go back as ambassadors for the whole thing. So it's all a way of encouraging talent. And just as important as for the child, it's about helping parents to understand the progression system, because one of the biggest issues that we have with all this is, I've got a really gifted child. What do I do? Where do I go? And so we're part of that network for the whole region, and that all helps it feed in. And I don't think there's a better place in the country in terms of the way that works, certainly within the Music Hub system, than in Greater Manchester.
It's all really interesting, and I didn't realise how massive the Hallé was until I spoke to you. And it also feels like it's a bit of a music school that has and certain outreach and engagement with the community instead of just being an orchestra. It's a concert society, isn't it? It's not just an orchestra.
Yeah, it's a concert society. I mean, just to explain that, there are 80 full-time members of the orchestra, and I mean, I still grin about it now. But when I was a player, so many people used to say, "Well, you're in the orchestra, but what do you do for your day job?" Well, this is the job, so they've got a lot of individual practice to be able to keep to that standard, because the standards are and have to be very high.
Yeah.
And then the players are involved in rehearsing. Obviously, they're involved in recording, but they're also obviously doing concerts. So the orchestra itself does about 130 concerts a year. 70 of those.
That's quite
a lot. 70 of those at the Bridgewater Hall, which is our main concert base within the Greater Manchester region. And then, of course, over the years and history from Hallé, the first city, if you like, that the Hallé played in other than Manchester was out to Bradford, so that relationship still continues. We play regularly in Sheffield, Nottingham, Stoke, Blackburn. We go up to Newcastle to the Sage, Gateshead. We play regularly in London in the BBC Proms. We go down to Birmingham and so on. So the orchestra has this network, takes us down to Cardiff occasionally, Warwick, where we're doing all these concerts everywhere. But I think it's fair to say, Martin, isn't it? We're a much more flexible organisation now because of what we do here now.
Yeah. I mean, So the concept of the concert society was it sort of formed out of post Hallé's death. There were a group of enthusiasts who didn't want to see his legacy, dismantled. Yeah. So they got together and created this society with the intention of then sort of continuing the musical life of the city, and in essence that's the organisation, which is a registered charity so it was constituted as a registered charity in 1899, wasn't it? Yeah. So we've worked for the concert society, for all our time here, and the society's essence is to continue this musical life of the city. So obviously that evolves as society evolves, and when music education provision in schools changed, as it did during the 80s, the Hallé as an organisation then understood that we needed to act, and indeed that's what
that change,
we do. So our I suppose right at the essence of what we do is we try to get the music of the Hallé and understanding of the. I suppose we should never be shy in saying it, really. He says spluttering before he says it, but excellence and musical excellence being something that we really value, that aiming for the best that you can be is something that we really take pride in, and we're not apologetic about that. So we see that what we do should try to be the pinnacle of musical achievement, if you like. Yeah. So therefore we want to provide high quality experiences for everybody that we work with always. And as Steve says, that could be child at a education event, or a pensioner at a community event, or that could be somebody sitting in the Bridgewater Hall listening to a concert. So that a quality experience is very, very important.
I'll give you an example of that particularly. We were involved. I won't mention names. But we were involved in working with a school in a challenging part of Greater Manchester, and to put it bluntly, these kids were off the wall a bit. So we were running some creative music classes with this particular group, and one of our cellists, who was particularly talented in the way that he would work with children, had got a certain amount of creativity delivered, and it was all going well. Then the kids had probably just had enough of concentration, and I arrived to sort of just finish off the end of the session, and I walked in, and there was this cellist with all these kids sitting around him playing Bach cello suites, which was just, he's a superb player, but actually to be able to just sit there and play, you can never underestimate the effect of a brilliant player on a group of anybody, sort of thing.
Yeah.
And with these children, who were definitely challenging, were just sitting there completely, dare I say it, gobsmacked at what was going on, but he was just playing Bach cello suite. And it was
really
one of the
amazing.
most remarkable experiences I think I've had in this job, just seeing how that just happened.
Yeah, the power of music. I
Oh, it's
suppose
brilliant.
that's-
That's what it absolutely Martin. Yeah.
Well, I'll keep saying it on this podcast. Music is so important, and it's very accessible when we want to, and it's got so many benefits for everything socially, for our intelligence, for our mental health, for some disabilities. I'm just reading a book, and I'm reading probably 4 pages a night, but to get me sleeping. But it's a book on. It's called the Brain Symphony. It's in French, but I really hope there's a translation in English.
Right.
And yesterday I read that playing music and getting into the rhythms, or learning how to have set rhythms and be structured with the rhythms, can really help you with reading, not just and language development as well. Not just speaking, but also reading and understanding letters. Because whenever we read with a certain rhythm, and so it helps us learn and improve our reading. So it's just something I read yesterday. But maybe the next for the next episode I'll have something else. But to summarize that, yeah, music is so important, and every child, to me, should have access to music, or singing, or any musical activity is great. I had a question, but I can't remember now. Sorry. I saw that you had. Oh yes, that's it. Music genre and styles. Do you focus on some certain styles, or do you teach all of them?
Well, as the non-musician, I'm going to let Steve.
I think what I can say here, one of the joys of my job is that I've got 80 musicians in front of me.
Yeah.
And they're musicians. Yeah, they play their Mahler and their Beethoven and all that sort of stuff. They're expert at that. But ultimately, they are musicians. So we've got Irish fiddlers, we've got Cuban music specialists, we've got jazzers, we've got songwriters, we've got electronic music. There's all those different skills. So whilst we would be necessarily in some of our creative work with schools, obviously we bring in children to concerts, we take that music that we perform in the concert, and then we help the children create their own version. It's very much owned by them, and what sort of the different styles that they come up with as much to do with the players they're working with. So everything goes.
Yeah.
And I think one of the joys of, as I say, of my job is that creative side can take many, many different forms. And so you might start with a group of children. You might be working with a Mozart symphony, and by the time the end of it, you've got a jazz piece that's come out of it,
Yeah.
or whatever. And that's again, and Martin's mentioned, it's the power of music, the way that can work. So whilst we are obviously connecting audiences to the orchestra and what we play, the variety of music that the Hallé plays is quite extensive. It's more these days than it has been in the past. So yes, we do our big classical concerts, and with Sir Marc Elder, one of the areas that he's particularly expertise in is opera. So the orchestra does opera performances and so on at the Bridgewater Hall, and they're very grand, and the quality is absolutely amazing because it has to be, and all that sort of thing. But we also do, ABBA tribute concerts. We've got a concert coming up next Friday with Claire Teal. So it's a sort of a Christmas jazzy sort of a night. So there's plenty of variety of work that we do as an orchestra, and a variety of different ensembles within the orchestra. So we play obviously regularly with 80 players, but some of the concerts we would try over 100 players. So some of those extra players, they're freelance pool that within the Greater Manchester and the North of England setup, but a lot of them are actually associates of the Hallé, so people that we regularly call on. And one of the things that always amazes me is the way that Sir Marc Elder, for instance, he just knows everybody. So somebody comes in, he'll know exactly who they are, and they've played for him before and so on. So that you keep that ensemble as much as possible, be the same clientele, same sort of people. and that helps you again build that excellence within the ensemble.
Great. How connected are you with the Cheetham Music School, RNCM? Where do you sit as well? Do you
Well, I suppose-
do you come as an add-on?
I
to
mean,
them?
it's worth noting that the Royal Northern College of Music, as it now is, was started by Hallé.
That's true. Yeah.
Yeah.
I forgot that.
So there's an intrinsic,
Yeah.
existential link, I suppose, of between the organisation. And as Steve said, I mean, we work. Actually, probably Steve can talk more loosely than.
I can say the
than I.
players, the players teach at both institutions. So we've got a number of our players, obviously, are professors, and they call them that teach at the Royal Northern College of Music. But we also have another group that teach at Cheetham's. And in fact, the sort of co-principal of Cheetham's used to be the second horn in the Hallé, and has now moved on to those different roles. So there's a clear tie-up across those organisations in terms of that development of talent, which is again where we're very much part of that for the region. So as Martin said, the Royal Northern College, as it is now, was set up to provide musicians for the Hallé. And of course, it's a much broader organisation now, and we were involved with them with some of our professional experience schemes, where our musicians are working with those students, and they take the very best of those, get an opportunity to come into the Hallé and play within these education programmes. But I'm pleased to say one of the projects that I started off back in 2003 was this thing called the Professional Experience Scheme for Wind, Brass and Percussion. Because we'd had a string scheme that had been going for quite a while, but we didn't do anything for the wind and brass and percussion, as I say. And 3 of our musicians now within the Hallé have come through that scheme. So our 2 flutes and our second horn are products of that professional experience scheme. It's also a way that we can look at the talent, in a sense, and see where that, how we can play our part in the development of that talent. So we work very closely with both institutions in terms of how we can provide that professional connection to that.
It's great. I saw on your website that you had the Siemens Hallé International Conductors Competition.
Yeah.
Who's that for? Is that for any conductor?
So we've just announced there are 8 shortlisted for the next
Finals,
competition, which takes place in early in 2023. So the Hallé's sort of had a long, certainly since Sir Marc has been in post, kind of a considerable sort of commitment to developing young conductors, and indeed a number of sort of the alumni of our associate conductor scheme are now incredibly well known. So I think the first that worked with Marc is Ed Gardner. Who's now gone on to
principal conductor of the London Philharmonic and out in Norway. So, I mean, just an amazing sort of conductor within the realm of the system now, but started that process as Sir Marc's assistant.
So the competition itself is international in its intention, and it provides the winner of the competition. I think initially it's a 2-year association with the organisation, so they work alongside the Hallé's music director, and they also become the principal conductor of our youth orchestra, and they get to kind of, I suppose, at a micro level, experience the process of being a music director, setting the musical direction and intention for a group, working with an administration to deliver a programme across a couple of seasons. So our current associate conductor is
Diliana Lazarova.
Thanks for saying her surname, because that always trips me up, Steve.
Yeah, she's Bulgarian, and she has been in that role. I think she's just about, in the summer she comes to the end of that role. Has been absolutely amazing. I mean, I think one of the wonders of this job is that where we've come across really fantastic talent, the Hallé rides with that talent during that contract. So they really do get a group of concerts with the orchestra, and they show their ability. They're given more, and the last incumbent, Jonathan Haywood, has just been made music director of the Baltimore Symphony Orchestra in the US. So Jonathan was
Brilliant.
with us for a few years, and then it's just gone on to great things after that. And I see absolutely that that Deliana will do the same. She's brilliant.
Yeah, she's got a
Well,
great
the-
career ahead of her.
Definitely.
No doubt.
What sort
So
of-
she was the she was
Yeah.
the first winner of the Siemens Hallé International Conductors Competition. So previously, selection of the associate director had a number of different sort of processes, but in 2020 we launched that competition. So Siemens have been a long-term sponsor and supporter of the Hallé, very much valued financially, but not just financially. They're kind of, back to that sort of family conversation we were having before, that they kind of feel invested in more than just, pounds.
Yeah.
They sort of understand. They often sort of talk about, their association starts with having fun, enjoying themselves doing the music, but actually they kind of, they're interested to see how engineers and orchestras who are perhaps not,
Fascinating.
not immediately associated, the similarities between the organisations and that pursuit of excellence, I think is key to that. They would see themselves as an organisation that wants the best,
Yeah.
and that matches with the Hallé's values in many ways. So that competition, they came as part of their many and varied associations on a sponsorship level. That they backed that competition in 2020. And that enabled us to kind of perhaps broaden the reach of the competition. It allowed us to fish in a bigger pool, if you like, for the talent. And
Talents come from every continent.
Yeah.
We've even had, for Deliana's position, there were even applications from North Korea, from places where you really wouldn't necessarily think you would get.
So do you have
get
collaborations with schools or organisations outside of the UK to get known, be known
So
by
I
that talent?
suppose we are
Yeah.
internationally, because of the Hallé's international reputation.
True,
I suppose
yeah.
we are in a fortunate position. The Hallé's always toured internationally, and through its recording works, even sort of from the 1930s onwards, it's had an international reach. So Hallé's reputation is beyond the UK. And I think we benefit from that in this competition.
Definitely.
So the Hallé are out, and I suppose the benefit that you can see of previous incumbents of the post have gone on to great things. I guess it's probably perceived the association with the Hallé and the opportunities that the associate conductors post present provide. They're sought after for a young conductor who's trying to establish themselves at the start of their career. It's a very attractive proposition. So not just, you don't just have an association with the Hallé, I suppose, that comes through that. We'd look to find, as Steve said, partners and other organisations that they can work alongside, and so that becomes a kind of a, we benefit from their talent while they're here, and hopefully in turn they benefit from perhaps our address book, I suppose. In some ways that opens them up. The networking that we talked about earlier, that that happens at that level too. So
It's a very broad experience that they're offered. Though.
Yeah.
That's really
and
key.
with a light shone on them, I suppose that's the key to it. Yeah.
I mean, they do all the schools content, so they have to work with children as well as, as Martin said, they are music director of the Hallé Youth Orchestra. So it's really preparing them for that industry, which is changing. It's becoming a lot more flexible in its approach. We've had some great stars that have come through that already, and I'm sure this year or this season we will find the next one.
I've got a question about conducting. How, to me, the way I've learned music, I've never been exposed to conducting. It doesn't seem for a musician who can read music. I feel like every musician can conduct. But maybe you're gonna prove me wrong, tell me wrong. But I also thought, I also thought, also writing music and improvising. I've wrote some music, but very low level, and improvising as well a little bit, but really late. And I've hated all the solfège, is that the word in English as well? Like all the theory music theory, I've always hated it
Yeah.
until I started to understand how you write some music, and I thought, why now? I'm thinking, why is it not taught earlier? And same as conducting, because if you play an instrument that plays in orchestras and stuff, you'll have a better understanding of what it is to play with others and what are the advantages. So, yeah, that's a broad question, but how has it changed? What sort of skills do you need to?
Okay,
to
well,
conduct?
I mean, conductors, they come in a broad variety of sort of different styles of people, let's put it that way. I mean, essentially, what you've got 80 people in front of you that are all experts.
Mm-hmm.
And you need somebody to focus that expertise into one vision, as it were, of what the music is supposed to be.
Yeah.
So they are the chief, the conductor's role is they are the chief interpreter of a piece of music. And part of their role, obviously, they've got to be great music. I mean, they've got scores in front of them, they've got all the parts in front of them. They have to know all those parts. So that, very simply, they're going to put the piece together. They're going to make sure you can hear the tunes and you can hear the accompaniments below the tunes and all that sort of basic side of it all. But, when you come to conduct the Hallé for the first rehearsal of a piece, what is expected is that everybody can play the part. That's already there. That's already done.
Yeah.
What the conductor does is blend all those different sounds into a single interpretation.
Yeah.
Otherwise, if everybody's got their own different ideas about how that fits, the whole ensemble doesn't work. It's a real team effort.
Yeah.
So that's that approach. I mean, broadly from what you were saying in your question there, Mark, I mean, we are fortunate in this country. We have something called the National Plan for Music Education.
Okay. Never
So
heard about
what that does, certainly across England schools, for instance, is it provides a sort of a basic blueprint of what a child's musical experience should be.
Yeah.
So that broadly means that a child should be given the opportunity to play an instrument, and just as importantly as that, they should be given the opportunity to sing,
Yeah.
to develop their musical skills through ensemble playing.
Okay.
So that's from a very, very early stage. And the Hallé, our program is very much connected to exactly that ethos. So we run a number of different schemes with all our hub partners that we work with. We've got 17 music education hub partners from Sefton to Nottingham via County Durham and Telford and Brecon and right. We've a big coverage of all that. But essentially what we're doing with that is we are a key part of those children's education musically. So the National Plan has an appendix to it, which gives a whole list of different musics from world music all across the whole spectrum, but quite a lot of orchestral music in there.
Okay.
So there's a real reason in England for an orchestra to be absolutely part of a child's music education. And we are very, so for instance, we have this scheme that is called the Whole Class Ensemble Teaching Programme, which in primary schools allows every child at an English primary school to play an instrument. And the way we work with that is we provide this concert in the summer term for those children to come and celebrate their musicality and what they've learned and so on. So they come and play with Hallé. It's literally called Come and Play with Hallé. And to give you an example of how that last summer, or summer 22, 25,000 children played with Hallé. So
25,000.
Yeah.
Not all at once.
Not all at once, but across 19 countries all over.
Could be.
Yeah.
So
The stadium.
that is about dropping the seeds.
Yeah.
You may not come back to us next week to a concert, but actually, we are finding students at the Royal Northern, with Chet's or wherever, who've their first connection to the Hallé was coming to play with them.
Brilliant.
That's how it has to work. That progression that's how it has to work. And as I say, we're right from the very beginning, the first musical experiences, through to the hope that our future players and our future audience are going to come out of those seeds we plant in those very early years.
Or some of them at least.
Absolutely,
Yeah,
Martin.
yeah,
We're quite realistic about it. As I say, they're not coming back to us next week. But having been in the business 40 years, when I'm almost in my first week as a player, somebody said to me, "Well, when all these older people, when they've all died off, you won't have an audience." But it hasn't worked that way. largely because people come to different musics at different time in their lives. You know, we can't take it for granted by any sense. You know, we've got to work at that. But, you know, we keep that process going. And I think you have to sow those seeds in the very early stage.
You know, the education programme is as much about audience development for the future as it is about that moment of enjoyment in the moment at that time, you know. It's, as Steve says, you know, it is making sure that people understand that an orchestra can be for them, you know, that we sort of demystify some of that, you know, perhaps perception that well, you know, I don't know very much about that, so therefore I can't access it. A big part of what we're trying to achieve as an organisation, particularly in the 21st century, is to strip all of that away. So this is for you. If you want it, it's here for you. If this moves you in any way, and I think, you know, as Steve sort of pointed out before, you know, that we can show examples of unlikely groups responding to the music of the Hallé in a very positive way. So therefore, you know, if we can get two people, we think we can engage with them and we think they'll enjoy it. So that's always the mission. Kind of the core of what we do, really, I think.
If you would like to come to Stratford, you're very welcome.
Yeah.
We've some schools there.
Yeah, we've got a few.
Stratford Hall as well.
All right. Well, we're in Gorse Hill
Okay,
Primary
yeah.
School. We do a program there called Inspire, Hallé Inspire, which there's English as second language is pretty high in Gorse Hill Primary School, but what this project, which works in 4 primary schools across Greater Manchester, in a very detailed way. It's a real partnership with the school. The school sets the curriculum, so at every term they will come up with a theme. It could be anything. It could be the science of irreversible change, or it could be the Egyptians or something like that. We musicalise that, and we work with these children with using creative music.
Great.
And the connection that is provided through the music is amazing. I mean, one of the great parts of my job is I can see these children at the beginning of that journey in September, and they're starting off, and their concentration is virtually nothing, you know. But by the time they get a culmination every term, and how those children grow in terms of their confidence, in terms of their concentration and performing abilities. They write poems, they set their poems to music with the Hallé players, and they perform these to parents. It's just brilliant to see that happen. So there's music again, as Martin been saying, you know, the power of music and how it can do that.
Well, from a personal point of view, my daughter is just getting 4. She'll be 4 in Feb, and she loves singing. She always sings at home. She makes up her own lyrics as well.
Okay, Hallé Children's Choir opens to children 8, so, you know, she's got a little...
but she's very, very shy, and I've always been worried about that shyness. But she recently had 2 Christmas songs taught at nursery, and they were singing in a group. And we thought also with the teachers that she would be very shy, so they would be worried because of having to sing in front of all those adults. But she was very good during the rehearsals, and she actually performed really, really well and sang really, really well.
Not a dry eye in the house.
Absolutely,
Yeah,
I'm really glad to hear that
Yeah.
singing is happening, because that's one of the biggest challenges at the moment we have. There's a marked lack of singing, largely because, very sadly, that ability in schools has gone, or in so many cases. I mean, one of the big problems we find is, you know, certainly when I was at school many moons ago, you know, there was somebody who could play the piano. There was a piano instrument there. Nowadays they're not, and there's too many schools around where there's no singing.
So that hesitancy and shyness extends to the staff, and you know, so we do offer programs to help. School teacher leading school choirs is one of the programs that we've run over the years, and you know that's very directly intended. Somebody that perhaps doesn't see themselves as a specialist music teacher, you know, the voice is the great equalizer, isn't it? Everybody's got a voice of some sort. You know, the qualities vary from but I strongly believe that everybody can be taught to sing. and you just need enthusiasm and confidence and backing.
Yeah, I always wondered, will you always, can every child or every person sing in tune? If you get the right education or not, if you get the right
it all depends on the age that when they're exposed to that. So, you've got this amazing studies that have been done, for instance, in Africa, the African village model, which means that in certain of these, obviously every child, every parent, everybody sings.
Yeah.
Where that happens, there's been various studies about sort of of human intelligence, and music is part of that intelligence. But it needs to happen in those formative years. So early years is absolute key to get those musical processes started.
Yeah.
Because if it's left until basically something after the age of 7 or 8, and there's no music in before then, that's when the people can't necessarily sing in tune. So it's
I would say harder, but not impossible.
I would agree with you, but
because
the
I
older it gets,
think
difficult.
you would find people perhaps who've come to the community choir, for example, and have not, would say, well, I can't even hold a tune, and by the time they've worked with a professional, and the thing about singing, like any physical activity, you have to train.
Yeah.
So you don't go to a gym and expect that you can lift 100. Kgs straight away. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
But if you work with somebody that shows you the technique and how to breathe and
True,
how to imagine pitch, sometimes it's using different parts of your brain that perhaps you haven't previously engaged.
It's like anything, though, isn't it? If you've done it at an early stage, it's a lot easier.
But I would back any one of our choral practitioners to get somebody in tune. Absolutely. Even in people in their senior years, I think they would back themselves to get them to sing in tune.
Yeah, I can believe that. The brain, I guess it's all happening in the brain. The brain is more flexible when we're younger, but it doesn't mean it's very rigid when we're older. And something that keeps me motivated, but I felt really bad of having to stop playing music, doing at uni because I didn't have time, I didn't have the facilities and stuff. But then I've always thought I can practice sport now because I'm fit enough and young enough to practice it. But there will be some time when I won't be able to practice as much. But music can be played until much later.
Yeah.
And it's incredible how much you can learn. Obviously, when you're a child, you learn quicker, but it's incredible how quickly you can learn an instrument. So I'm hopeful that later, when I will have more time,
you'll be a multi-instrumentalist. Is that the plan?
Keep playing loads.
Yeah.
What's your plan for Christmas? What's the Hallé's plans for Christmas?
Goodness me, I was talking to Martin, we've got 18 concerts in December.
18?
Yeah, so those are sort of obviously Christmas concerts. There are some regular concerts as well. We've got, in recent years, we've started a chamber series. So there's 8 chamber concerts with a smaller number of players that perform here at Hallé St Peters. And we do these, what we call relaxed concerts. So for specialist sort of type audiences that we're looking at people that wouldn't come normally necessarily to a Hallé concert, or in a lot of cases have been part of our audience before but now don't feel able to come because we're working with dementia families, we're working with adults with learning difficulties and stroke victims and things like that. So it's quite a variety of different concerts. Mostly, obviously, this time of year with a Christmas theme involved. Probably the biggest concerts we do, aren't they, Martin? There are 3, the carol concerts. Where we've got all our ensembles playing part of that.
Bells, whistles, organs,
absolutely,
orchestras, choirs.
It's all going on.
Yeah.
So we do those, and then we've got right at the end of just before Christmas, we've got this snowman concert. So the orchestra provides a live accompaniment to the snowman film, but in the first half of that, there's lots of different sort of more activity type pieces, in a sense to wear the kids out, a bit of an interval if you like, and then they'll sit with their families and just watch the snowmen. So we've got that.
Yeah, and those concerts feature a singer from the children's choir who sings the soprano part of "Walking in the Air," which sort of famously known to that piece. But yeah, it's
plenty going on.
Yeah, and then outside of the Hallé's activities, so my team, so a large part of the responsibilities of the Hallé Venues team is to animate the building when the Hallé ensembles aren't in the building. So that's kind of, I suppose, 50% of our activities are internal activities, rehearsals and recordings and small size performances. And then outside of that, as a sort of commercial concern, is to animate the space and initially try to cover the costs of operating here. And then, hopefully in time turn that into profit, which can then go back into our artistic activity. So during that period, so when the orchestra aren't here, we do the things that venues do. So in the past 24 hours, we will move from having had a large corporate Christmas party last night to tonight, bringing in the choir to rehearse alongside a smaller chamber-sized orchestra as they prepare for the performance of Handel's Messiah at the Bridgewater Hall on Saturday. So it's ever evolving. So we're kind of December is a very, very busy period for the Hallé. Always traditionally has been, and financially it's a very important time of year for us. We our box office relies upon a good Christmas to kind of within our annual target. A lot of the money comes in through the doors during the December period.
I was going to ask that.
Yeah, so it's a very important part of. Because particularly because I suppose we're able at this time of year, quite a lot of our offering has very, very broad appeal, and therefore, families engage at all generations. Sometimes you've got 4 generations of family at a concert together. So therefore, the carol concerts that Steve referred to repeat. So we do the same show 3 times over 2 days, and fit another concert in with our youth ensembles in between that. It's a busy period and important financially for us. So
one thing I forgot to say is the society is a charity.
That's correct. Yeah,
and I've got a question. How does the charity affect the organisation side? And
significantly.
Benefits, and what are the advantages? What are the disadvantages? And also a question which I'm just thinking now: what would you do differently if you were not a charity?
Well, I think our charitable status is incredibly important. Crucially, I suppose in the UK, we always use the word charity. Elsewhere in the world, they might use the word. They might describe us as a not-for-profit. Yeah, and I think that's kind of an important distinction. So I've worked for most of my career in what would be described as the third sector for not-for-profit organisations. I've worked for care charities. I've worked for mental health charities, and now I work for a charity that's based in the arts. And I think the key to all of those organisations is that you are providing something of service to the communities in which you work. And the Hallé is no different to a cancer care charity in some ways. In that way, what we're trying to do is make people's lives better through our fundamental existence. So the structure of the organisation is that our funding comes from a variety of activities. So we receive some central and local government grants by the Arts Council through the Greater Manchester Combined Authority and through Manchester City Council. So we receive money, and those monies are given in following. We have to apply for those monies, and those applications contain criteria of what we will do on receipt of those monies to fulfil kind of a contract, if you like, with the funders. So in Greater Manchester, we have a certain set of criteria in terms of where we will work and how we will work and who we will try to reach. That's the same with the Arts Council funding, which is the central government, and Manchester City Council. Obviously, that's very specific to our activity within the City of Manchester, and our residency at the Bridgewater Hall. That particularly supports that area of our work. outside of those sorts of grants, if you like, we then obviously we generate income through box office and ticket sales as a concert promoter, and then in addition to that, the orchestra exists as a sort of a band for hire, if you like, and we go to other concert venues and other places where we are engaged to play there, and we receive a fee for playing there. We work in broadcast and recording, so fees come in from those activities, some more lucrative than others. And then in addition to that, we then have a fundraising need, and we have a brilliant development team. Development is a word that the arts use when they really mean fundraising. But I understand why, but having worked in other charitable areas, I think fundraising is a much better expression, because it says exactly what it is that you're trying to do, and it leaves people in no doubt that you need to raise funds. So the organisation, it's probably more than a 7-figure sum now that we bring in through fundraising activities alone. And that splits down to money that we receive from companies through sponsorship, and that's very often some form of transactional relationship. They give a bit and they receive something back, whether it's branding, whether it's association, whether it's activity. What we like to do with our sponsors is to make those relationships interesting. It's not just we talked about Siemens.
It's been a really fascinating development. I mean, the way that, for instance, the education role has got more involved in this connection, particularly with the corporates. It used to be in years gone by, it was corporates bringing clients to concerts and all that sort of thing. That doesn't really happen much now. But one of the joys of my job is the way that we've developed, really, as Martin referred to there, is those really in-depth relationships with our sponsors. So, for instance, our principal sponsor, just to say, that's at PZ Cussons. One of the things that we do for all our schools concerts in the spring, the Hallé for Youth concerts, every child gets a scratch and sniff card that's produced by the fragrance team at PZ Cussons. They work with me in terms of the choice of the music. So there's a scratch and sniff card that represents that for 3 pieces of music in a concert, and there's a fragrance that's designed to go with that piece of music. I don't know another orchestra in the world that does anything quite so wacky as that. But it means if you come to the Hallé, it's a multi-sensory experience. So, we have screens with all the stuff on, bits of the music and all that sort of thing there. You've got the orchestra to listen to, and then you actually smell it as well. So that has come purely through this relationship, which, as I say, gone are the time where a sponsor might say, well, we like what you're doing, here's a few quid, carry on doing what you do. Now it's more a relationship.
And workforce engagement, and so sometimes it's about staff reward, or we talked earlier about well-being, staff being given the opportunity to come, much less as a sort of corporate entertainment thing, but like a well-being thing is probably. And we work with one of our longest standing supporters, Brother. They've been involved in all sorts of elements of our work. So we do Steve's team do a brilliant scheme called Hallé Empresarios, which provides it's usually secondary school children the opportunity to imagine the life of being a concert promoter for a day. And so they work in the business world, but they see the business world from our perspective of, okay, we're going to put a concert. What are the things that you have to think about to do that? What might go wrong? And during the course of the day, Steve and his team have come up with some flashcards, which eventually, they think everything's going fine, and then
but it isn't.
We drop it in because, your soloist has just called and they can't get on their flight from such and such to get to you in time for the concert. What are you going to do? So it's about that kind of developmental thought of planning and then replanning and then replanning, which is a large part of what the Hallé does on a day-to-day basis. Sort of being adaptable. Have a plan, but then is your plan adaptable enough? Will it survive? A curveball.
Brother judged that.
Yeah.
So there's a small prize for the winning group, but the Brother sort of do like a Dragon's Den with that. So they're questioning, why have you chucked your ticket prices at that price? Why do you think you're going to, so they really question the students as to how they go on that and have to
So
promote that.
it's
Quite
that,
interesting.
it's that sort of blend between, music and economics, I suppose. It's, kind of business studies. Is
And with,
kind of
with Siemens,
important.
they've got a graduate engineer scheme. So we get heavily involved in that. So, for instance, we've got a dementia program over at Pendine Care Homes in Wrexham, and those engineers have been developing a wristband, a musical wristband, that basically means that somebody can shake their hand and play a shaker, or they can play a drum, or they can play a tune by just lifting up their hand and so on, which means that so many more of them can actually take part in the creative side of the workshop. That's come through that relationship.
sort of directly addresses the limitations that some people may have and tries to engage and include. And I think that's a big part of what we're
So those relationships now with those organisations.
So
has been
that's
brilliant.
kind of the business side of how our funding works. And then the world, within the charitable sector, there are a number of trusts and foundations who exist to assist with charitable activities. So part of the team, their job is to go out and match the trust with the activity, and Steve's team and the ensembles team often will engage in that. They kind of perhaps they can provide funding to enable us to do things that we might not ordinarily do. Actually, we've just recently had, from an environmental perspective, we've just recently had a success, which meant that we will be able to add some solar power to the building that we're currently in, which we weren't originally able to afford. So that's helped us in that way and makes us more sustainable financially and environmentally. The Trust and Foundations is a kind of a key part of any arts organisation sort of set up, and we're very fortunate that we have a number of trusts who've been incredibly generous over the years to us. And then the final part of that, and this is where I came into the organisation when I first came in, the Hallé, we talked about Hallé family. So we've talked about the membership of the organisation, and they are people who pay a membership fee and are associated with the organisation. But outside of the membership scheme, we have a patron programme, and that has many hundreds of people in it. Probably, I would say, at its broadest, approaching 1,000 people who give in some way every month or every year. They give a gift over and above what they give through attending concerts. The most important way in which people can engage with this is always coming to concerts, buying tickets. That's we want to see people in the concert hall, but for people that perhaps live a bit further away and aren't as able to get to Manchester, but still want to support the Hallé, they will send us gifts. So there's a patron programme or a chair endowment scheme.
Chair endowment is good, isn't it?
Where they can associate with the organisation and feel a bit closer, and those people are able to, depending on when and how they give, access certain, I suppose, behind the scenes elements in return for their support. That we're able to kind of bring them a bit closer to the organisation. And they're kind of critical parts of our funding. The Hallé at the end of the 20th century found itself in financial trouble, and critical to its sort of continuation was the fact that the public at that time responded and sent money, bailed us out, and we don't take that support for granted at all. We're very, very appreciative still to this day of what they did for us at that time. So and what has happened from that is that you have a group of people who continue to give in a committed way, and that enables the Hallé to go and do some things that perhaps you asked the question about what would be the difference between you being a commercial entity and doing. If we only did things for profit, there would be a lot of things that we do that we wouldn't be able to do. That element of philanthropic support and I suppose benevolence from the audience and our public funders and corporate supporters, it gives us the opportunities to do things that perhaps on paper commercially don't make sense, but artistically are absolutely vital. And I think that's art subsidies are a long topic, and we probably haven't got enough time to talk about the UK's response to the UK's model is a different model to the US's model, and it's a different model to Europe's model. I don't know, there are somewhere in between is the right version of that. There are orchestras in the major cities in Europe that are completely subsidised.
Yeah.
And ticket prices are cheap, and that enables people to access art. Now, you would say, sitting where we sit, that's the perfect model. There may be opposing views in those countries. I don't know, but so we manage. It's a large organisation, so we sort of talked about the turnover. I think the last sort of 8-9 million is sort of the turnover of the organisation. So it's not an inconsiderable enterprise. Mm-hmm. But so if we get to the end of the year and there's money left in the pot, then that money gets used for quality
artistic
projects, an artistic programme or education and outreach work. And it's we're backed up. The society's backed up by a board of trustees. They have oversight, I suppose, and then they work with the executive and the senior management team, and who deliver on a day-to-day, week-to-week, month-to-month basis, and set our strategic challenges and targets, and so the governance of the organisation, I think, works very well. We have a group of people that scrutinise what we do, and then allow us through that scrutiny to then get on and deliver the work. So I think it's I don't know that I would change the model.
No, I wouldn't. I totally agree.
For 100 and since 1899, since Hallé died, since the man that formed it, and this model's been a version of this has been the way that we've operated, and I think it makes sense. I think it stacks up. Something we must be doing something right. We're still here, And there's lots of commercial entities who haven't lasted that long and wouldn't last that long. So, but we always come back to that. Sense of
you can always do better. But it's doing well. It's doing pretty well from
The health of the organisation is something that we check all the time.
Absolutely,
all the time. Are we true to our mission? Are we true to the vision of the original vision of the organisation? Is that still in our sights? Are we delivering for the people that we're supposed to serve? We talk about that a lot, and increasingly we're talking about, are we reaching? As society around us has evolved, are we reaching everybody that we can reach? And I think that's the challenge for a 21st century organisation, is to be relevant in a ever evolving society. Are we representative of the city that we work in? Do we reflect the city that we work in? When the city changes, how quickly can we change to reflect that? So relevance and diversity, I think, are really important parts of the future.
Totally top of our agenda in the way that works. The Hallé's shown, as Martin referred to, we've been adaptable.
Yep.
All the way that's coming in, and I think the basic sort of programs and the ideas are there for the next stage. And I've mentioned before the more flexible ensemble, an ensemble that's going to get more out into the community in various different forms.
Yep.
For instance, the other day we did a relaxed concert in Staley Bridge as part of the celebrations with Staley Bridge as the Greater Manchester Combined Authority Town of Culture, and the feedback and the response we got was amazing. So that's something we've learned from that, and we'll continue to do that. In terms. You can't get an 80-piece orchestra in so many places in Greater Manchester, but a smaller group.
Yeah, sometimes they have to come to us.
Absolutely, there's a
reason concert halls exist.
Yes, there is.
Yeah, true.
But there's also a great benefit to getting our musicians out there. Sir Marc Elder would argue the same thing as I would on this, and that is keeping the musicians fresh is really important part of the way we work with them. So I found when I was a player, I used to call it "Oh no, not Beethoven 5" syndrome. Yeah, it's great music, but we've done it 8 times this week, and I don't really want to play it again. So there's got to be more to an orchestra musician's life in terms of how you develop that. and the education program and the opportunity to come here with Martin and his team to play the chamber concerts and relaxed concerts, all these different forms of working out in the schools keeps those musicians fresh.
Great, interesting. Which kind of leads this fairly good transition to the venues.
Yeah.
So you mentioned a few venues. So this Bridgewater Hall, St Michael's, and St Peters.
That's right. Yeah.
Can you describe which activities are run in each place, and then we'll talk a little bit more.
Yeah.
About
Okay.
St.
So
Peters
so
as well.
our performance home is the Bridgewater Hall, and has been since 1996. We are the resident orchestra, the principal user of that building. But we don't own that building, and I think that's a bit of a common misconception. I mean, I know people who refer to the Bridgewater Hall as the Hallé, but I mean, I think that's perhaps 25 years or whatever it is,
Right.
more than that. Down the line, that's it's perhaps a bit unfair to the wide range of activities that happen in the Bridgewater Hall when we're not there. That's an international, one of the greatest concert halls probably in the world. We're very privileged to be able to call that home for performance, and as Steve said, we present 70 concerts thereabouts a year, as well as sort of the stuff we do on tour and engagements elsewhere in the country and around the world. But when we're not there, as we've talked about, the organisation has a huge amount of activity that we have to accommodate in terms of preparation, largely.
Yeah.
And that's for more than one ensemble. So I'm not 100% sure of the genesis of the idea, but between our previous chief executive, John Summers, and our current music director, Sir Marc Elder, it became a very clear strategic vision that the Hallé needed to have a place it could call its own for that sort of work, for preparation, and a place where we could come and work together and really kind of hone the craft. For most of the Hallé's life, the organisation had been pretty nomadic in terms of its rehearsal activities. Even when it was in the Free Trade Hall wasn't always available to rehearse or to be available, so they would rehearse in other venues around the city. And I would probably suggest that any room built between 1850 and 2010 that was big enough for the Hallé to fit in, they've probably rehearsed in there at some point. Now, a number of those rooms will have been utterly inappropriate for a symphony orchestra to go and rehearse in. They'll have been sports halls or any large space, but you might be in a room that has no acoustic at all.
Consistent acoustic is the key, isn't it?
And so I think that was critical to the kind of the strategic development of the organisation, that continual improvement, that sort of strive for excellence. So strategically, it was a intention and ambition. Financially, it's a stretch. That finding. So and the Hallé had never owned a building in its 150-year history when we became aware that there was this church in Ancoats, which had some money spent on it to be restored, but was sitting vacant, having been through a process where there was an intended occupant, and at the 11th hour that didn't happen. So a shell restoration had been done of this church, with nobody to then go in it, and we became aware in sort of the end of 2009, early 2010 that there was this space, and we'd been having these conversations. Could we, would it be appropriate for us? Could we get in there? I mean, I think the first time anybody came to see the church, it was in a shell restoration. St Peters used to be an Anglican church in the heart of Ancoats.
Sorry, was it before all the new buildings?
No. So
it was in happening.
So we were essentially the first here.
Okay.
Prior to kind of there'd been one lot of development, which is the Cutting Room Square space, which sits outside.
Yeah.
Had some work on it, but because of the financial crash of 2008,
Yeah.
the majority of kind of works happening locally had really slowed down. The confidence of developers wasn't there. The money to develop wasn't there. So actually, it was a considerable concern when we came to St Peters that we might be, that the area wouldn't develop around us, and that we would be this sort of cultural, ghetto, if you like. Ancoats had been an area that had been horribly neglected for decades. John Summers used to use the expression that nobody cared enough about it to even knock it down for a period of time, which now, when you see it sort of listed in all the coolest magazines as the coolest place to go, is a remarkable transformation for an for an area.
It's changed really, really fast.
Yeah,
Ridiculous.
so the Hallé's journey, and I could talk at length at this, so I won't, because we've only got so long. But the Hallé's journey here was that, in essence, we found the space, we were committed to doing it, but financially we weren't in a position to do it. We were very, very fortunate that we had some really good, strong advice, support, and I suppose an element of kind of critical friend from outside the organisation, led largely by a gentleman called Michael Oglesby of the Oglesby Charitable Trust, and the company Bruntwood, who are property developers, largely based in Manchester, but it's a national company. And he alongside the Hallé's board, convinced themselves that the idea of taking on a property and converting it for our own purposes would be a benefit to the organisation.
Yeah.
And in turn, that would then act as a catalyst for change for the rest of the rest of the area, and indeed, so it proved. So we eventually, after some negotiation, there's another podcast in the whole of this sort of story.
We can do it,
and perhaps we could do it. Actually, well, we're coming up to the 10th anniversary of the organisation.
Let's do it.
Moving here, so perhaps we should do it.
If you'd like that one.
Yeah.
Definitely.
So in 2012 we got the keys, and we did sort of about 8 months of internal fit and adaptation to make the church space fit for purpose. Attached to the church space was a development plot, but at that time we only had enough money to do the church. Or the former church, as I should say. The space is deconsecrated. It's not a church anymore. It's still, which is why it's known as Hallé St Peters, not St Peters. Important that we repositioned it as a new entity. So we did a internal fit, which provided a much better acoustic, gave it a genuine acoustic treatment, stopped sound leaking out, stopped sound leaking in, gave a warmth to the sound. So we replaced the concrete floor with a oak floor. We put tertiary glazing in. There's acoustic panelling around lots of the space, which gives a consistency of sound. I don't imagine anybody in the organisation would say it's a perfect acoustic for anything that we do, but it works for everything that we do, and I think that was the key.
Yeah, that's a good balance.
So I think if you're doing a chamber concert in there, you might feel a bit exposed at times. I think the acoustic can be a bit unforgiving in that way. I think if you're a children's choir, when you're really little and tiny, it might be a bit too big of a room for you.
Yeah, exactly. There's a difference in volume you need to keep.
But for the adult choir, actually, probably, it gives them lots of what they need. Yeah. But they would probably want it slightly more reverberant, so they don't always have to work quite as hard to fill the space. So there are, but in terms of that kind of multi-use, which we always knew it would need, we've been able to achieve that. So
sorry, you didn't change the volume at all. You just improved probably the glazing, if you said.
Yeah, so we put double glazing. So because it's a listed building, we were limited in what we were able to do.
Yeah, of course.
So there's an external original or a recreation of the original frame, and then internally there's a double glazing unit, which then kind of prevents that sound leakage in and out.
Yeah.
In fact, one of the first sort of complaints we had from neighbours was that they couldn't hear our rehearsals because they thought it would be lovely to sit in their flat with the windows open and hear the Hallé. I mean, the person that told me this said on a Sunday morning. And I thought, well, they have no idea how orchestras work if they think they're in on a Sunday morning rehearsing. But yeah.
Well, yeah.
But,
usually, what the criteria for noise are to not hear the music.
Yeah,
Exactly.
So it was that was a nice neighbourly complaint, if you like. So we operated in the space for 5 years. So we started in February 2013 and worked through to kind of the summer of 2018, and slowly added in activities. So it started with the orchestra, then the choirs came, and then the ensembles came, and this gave us a single home where all of our organisation could come together and feel like a familiar place to them. And I think that's really important for the development of an organisation, that consistency of experience and certainty of experience. The Hallé used to spend a huge amount of time trying to find places to rehearse and practice, our ensembles to practice. Taking that out as a activity has been very freeing for the organisation. If it's not happening at the Bridgewater Hall, it's happening in Ancoats. That's essentially the way that it works. And so we had this wonderful former church space, very large space, which fits the orchestra and all of our ensembles in. But what it didn't have were any ancillary facilities that there was nowhere to break out to. There was nowhere if you were a member of the orchestra who was in the first piece in in the overture and in the symphony, but you weren't in the concerto, and you were rehearsing all of that in a day. Where did you go while the concerto was being rehearsed? Because you're not on the platform for that moment. Yeah. So we added. There was then an ambition for can we add on the development plot? Can we add a space that then provides us all of those additional facilities, which really make and I'll use the pun, make the venue sing, if you like. We didn't have everything that we needed, and we had this development plot alongside it, and we were very fortunate that some of the people that had backed the first stage of our development, if you like, had provided us with some feasibility funds that we could then go and look at, well, what could you do on that spot?
Yeah.
Around the same time, the Homes and Communities Agency, who had been the government body that had originally owned the church, came to us and said, we've got another church, former church, just around the corner. We know you've got plans to ambition on site, but would this be of any use to you if we were able to facilitate your moving in there? And that's the St Michael's space, which is on George Lee Street, which is a very short distance away from here. And again, it's a large room, but it's been a brilliant kind of addition to the sort of Hallé St Peters 1.5, if you like, rather than so it wasn't the full ambition, and of course there's distance between the buildings and all of those things, but it provided us with a slightly smaller space and some administrative space and a bit of kind of storage, which we didn't have previously here. So that then kind of added to the activities that we were able to do here. And it really informed the process of what we would need in a single entity, facility. So as I say, we were fortunate that we got some support from one of the Monument Trust. In fact, the room we're sitting now is the Monument Room, named after them for their benevolent support and generous, very generous support. And they that money enabled us to really accelerate our plans, literally our plans for the site, in that we were able to stage a REBA competition and we put it out internationally through REBA to say, what could you fit here? And we developed a brief that worked on, nice to haves or essentials, and wouldn't it be good if we could do this? And so there was a broad stakeholder engagement process for to begin with, and then you sort of pat that down into a smaller kind of project team who then really work up a brief. And we put a brief together. We worked with REBA on that, what you're looking to do, and then we put that out to the market, and we had international applications from 40 or 50 practices, which we then from Italy, right. I mean, lots of British ones. I think any involvement with a kind of a music venue is quite sought after for the architectural world.
Yes.
I think they do a lot of residential and
even for acousticians.
And they bring together really interesting teams. You kind of got multidisciplinary teams that kind of come and work, and of course acousticians are kind of a critical part of that. So it went out to sort of an international field. We had a really high quality panel that helped us sort of judge the applications. We came down to a shortlist of 5 who developed there. We were able to offer a bursary for their work.
Do you remember who they were? Who they were?
I couldn't remember all of them.
The architects.
Yeah. So there was the winners were Stevenson Studio.
Studio.
Field and Clegg Bradley were one. Jamie Fobart, who'd done Damien Hirst's gallery. I mean, a really interesting group of. But later on, I can't remember them all off the top of my head.
No worries.
There were some really interesting applications. And
how do you select the winner? What were your criteria?
Well,
for selection.
Fortunately, I wasn't involved in that decision because I believe it was a really difficult. So the people that were kind of critical to those decisions there was a panel which included a couple of architectural advisors, including Sir Jeremy Dixon, who'd done the extension at the Royal Opera House.
Yeah.
But also included members of the Hallé, so our then finance director Val Hawkin, who was kind of a real critical and pivotal kind of driver in the whole process of kind of how the money would work and how we would get there. John Summers, who's our then chief exec, David McKeith, who's our current chairman, and there was a kind of a what do we want? There's a degree of aesthetic that's important. There's a degree of functionality that's important.
Yeah.
There's a degree of and I mean I wasn't involved in that process, but it was hard fought and hard won, but won by Stevenson Studio, and I think critical to their application was the fact that they had worked, and we talked earlier about the interconnectivity of Manchester's musical life. That Stevenson Studio had delivered the extension at Chetham's School of Music and the Stoller Hall there. So they brought all of that learning in terms of what we as a client would be looking for and we would be interested in. They brought all of that learning to the project. And I think it was that was the fact that they were a Manchester-based practice gave them a kind of competitive advantage, I felt, in terms of their understanding of the aesthetic and what the aesthetic of the city is like, and how, particularly when you're putting something next to a much loved Grade 2 listed building, how you do that without it looking like pastiche, or that it's appropriate, it's fitting. And they really work hard at that, and you highlight the greatest areas of the existing building, and you add to it without trying to say have your building shout look at me and forget about that there. They've managed to find that balance.
You've got to understand the Manchester identity.
Well, I think
in Manchester.
Critical to that was the brick that they selected. So there's this beautiful sort of people often talk about red brick as being the aesthetic of Manchester, but actually it isn't red, it's much more of an orange, and they found that tone that matched but wasn't as I say, wasn't trying to ape the they changed the shape of the brick, they changed it so that it gave the new building an identity of its own, but it was sympathetic to the original building, and I think that's their great achievement in that. But then, in addition to that, they gave us some spectacular spaces. The Victoria Wood Hall, particularly, is for me is a triumph, and a room that acousticians would hate from a brief because we said it had to have natural light in it, and of course, for the listener, the face that came from the acoustician on having windows in an acoustic space is
so you managed it.
And with and it makes that room, which is used particularly by our children's choir,
Okay.
it makes it a really lovely space for them to be in. You know, so much of the joy of working for our musicians in St Peters and the associated spaces is that they get to work in rooms with natural light.
It's
Because
great.
for most of their professional careers, they're in sealed boxes.
Studios, yeah.
Yeah, from an acoustic point of view, obviously you've got the noise from outside coming in, and you've got very, very low levels to meet.
Yeah.
But it's great when you can have a place in, or either you design it well, and maybe there's a budget that comes with it,
Yeah.
or you have it in the middle of nowhere, very landscapey place,
Yeah.
and you just make make everything visible, or just natural light coming in is great. I
Yeah,
agree.
yeah. So we were so obviously we were not in a position where we were in the middle of nowhere. We were right in the middle
Yeah.
of a building revolution. Really, you know, it's
Yeah.
kind of we were surrounded at one point by cranes and construction sites and sheet piling and all of the things that kind of
Make the building shake. And
made
all
the
that.
building
Yeah,
shake.
goodness me.
But the Victoria Wood Hall is a box-in-box space, so that means that it's acoustically separate to the rest of the building, and therefore we kind of it's quadruple glazed, so nothing gets in through those windows, and it's a very quiet space in the middle of a very busy area, and it there's something really remarkable about that, how quiet it is. When I often take people around the building, and when they walk into the room, they suddenly realise that sense of calm and quiet, which is a great boon for us in terms of. So I mean, I've given you a very quick and not particularly, I don't think, coherent timeline through the process, but yeah, we went from in 2010, the ambition, but a financial climate that wasn't easy for us to fundraise or through to opening in 2013, closing in 2018, and then it took just over 18 months for the build to take place. We received the keys in November 2019. We opened to fanfare and fireworks, and with a considerable ambition of what we would want to achieve in the space, lots of plans.
Yeah.
And then, of course, 16 weeks after that, the world changed.
Pandemic hit.
So we opened and then we closed.
And that's frustrating.
Yeah, very, very frustrating. But actually, and sort of back to the point about the Hallé's relationship with buildings, is that not being the owner of the Bridgewater Hall was then incredibly limiting for the organisation.
Yeah.
We were reliant upon the operating company for access even to our offices. So our head office is based at the Bridgewater. Our administrative base is based at the Bridgewater Hall. So we were all sent to our homes to work for but then when returning to the office, we could only return to the office once the Bridgewater Hall was able to reopen. And of course, because they are not, whilst we perhaps have 100 days of operation in the building, they weren't allowed to open in any meaningful way for any other activity. So understandably, they mothballed the building, and our access to the offices there was very limited. So I think there was a period of time where we could get in one morning a week, and if anybody needed anything, they were able to kind of meet socially distanced and get around the building, or go and collect some music, or go and So yeah, that was a very difficult time. But having St Peters and having it open meant that actually we had a place that we could be in control of. We could take control of all of that kind of COVID security, and it gave us an opportunity to kind of work through that. So if we'd been halfway through the build, I genuinely don't know what the organisation would have done. I'm so grateful.
Absolutely that.
Yeah.
I mean, one of the great things during that time was, we did have time to breathe and actually create some unique content. So, I mean, our digital team sort of bloomed through that time. And if we hadn't got St Peters, we couldn't have done half of what we did in terms of some of that smaller scale pieces and things that went out to schools and all that sort of thing.
So what did you do exactly?
Well, yeah. So initially, like most arts organisations, that we made use of the opportunities that sort of the furlough scheme did for kind of continuing our existence, and the majority of the musicians were placed onto furlough. But periodically initially we would bring out 1 or 2 musicians a week, and they would film some content that we could share with our audience through our social media channels or via our website, which would, kind of a bit of a, we were thinking on our feet, how do you take 80, the essence of 80 musicians and kind of create that. So that a bit kind of behind the curtain stuff was sort of behind the scenes stuff was the start of it. And then as we sort of developed and the advice in terms of how you could congregate, how you could work became a bit clearer, we then brought smaller ensembles together to work in the space, film some content, put that out, broadcast it, again, initially through social media channels. And then eventually, as we sort of began to open up, and the Cultural Recovery Fund was made available to organisations like ours, we applied to create some specific online content and recorded content, which we, back to this quality word that we talk about sort of all the time. And, when I was talking about, the building, the reason we went through a REBA competition was about that pursuit of excellence, about that kind of, making sure that you're going for the best of the best. So we wanted, if we were going to put something out, it's very easy to film something, put it onto YouTube and, for it to exist. But does it exist in a way that represents the organisation as you see yourselves and as you want your audience to receive you? So we worked very hard. We worked with some partners, and we essentially became a TV production company for a period of time, where we picked some pieces that we could fit in here, initially at St Peters, but also we by that point were able to provide some funding to support our colleagues at the Bridgewater Hall to get the building partially reopened, so that we could get all of the orchestra onto an extended stage at the Bridgewater Hall, which was kind of the big challenge to begin with. Was how do you get the musicians back together when they've got to be 2 metre distance or a metre distance?
Yeah, we played with sort of 60 odd players, but quite interesting to see that the brass section were right up by the organ, right up in the Bridgewater Hall, obviously where the choir seats would be, and spaced out as Martin said, and then it's quite a huge extension on the front. So the distance between the leader, for instance, say, and the first trumpet was considerably more than what it would normally be. So the usual issues of how you get an ensemble to play together were magnified incredibly. Having said that, one of the great things that came out of that was, in a sense, the way the string section bloomed, because everybody could really hear what they were playing, and they all had their own stand. So obviously, normally they would share a stand. Yeah. All had their own stands. People started to really hear exactly what they were doing and working on their playing in that respect. And the whole sound of the orchestra was quite considerably different in lots of ways.
Yeah, it's one phenomenon that happens where the orchestra is so loud that you can't hear yourself, which is very important. And so it's the cocktail effect, where you play louder because you want to hear yourself, but then all your neighbours realise you play louder, so they'll play louder, and then they end up playing really, really loud.
It was a really interesting time, and certainly, we made, as Martin said, really high quality video concerts and so on, that went out to all
over the world. So I mean, so there, we eventually, after the kind of sort of moments of, I suppose, existential crisis, realised that there was opportunity in the situation, so kind of putting content together that could be seen more than just our audience in Manchester.
One question I have is, obviously that content is really interesting for an audience, but it doesn't bring money unless maybe
so with
the views of YouTube you can monetize everything. But how did you get money, and did you?
So there was a grant. Well? There was a grant from which enabled us to do the work initially, and then we put it out as a subscription service via Vimeo, which could be paid for. And that was kind of an experimental thing. I mean, we were conscious that there were lots of other organisations who were in exactly the same position, and some of whom perhaps had started that work before us. you know, some people have kind of their own app and their own channels already well developed. Some, you know, arrive with your Sony TV, some of them pre-installed, you know. So it was, how do you find your niche? How do you find your... So the first thing was that we wanted to, you know, wanted to get the orchestra back playing, existing, you know, the kind of this continual performance element of the Hallé's life is a really important part of our heritage, you know, that we've never stopped playing. We've performed concerts in every year of our existence, and you know, when you're sort of looking at, will that happen? But we managed to do that. So we got the orchestra back and in a meaningful way as an ensemble. And then you know, can we service our audience? Can we give them concerts that they want to see? So we had, I think, 8 subscription concerts, and we also, in the run up to the Christmas of 2020, wasn't it? Yeah, in the run up to Christmas 2020, we recorded a YouTube concert, which we gave away free
For Christmas,
on YouTube for a limited period because of the way performing rights were. We couldn't afford for that to be up. The streaming fees would be you know, too exorbitant for it.
Yeah.
But for a limited period, we were able to budget that, and we essentially, that was our Christmas gift to the city.
Yeah.
And that had thousands and thousands and thousands of views. Those people that come to the Bridgewater Hall for their Christmas concert weren't able to come, were able to sit sometimes. So I know of families who called each other and pressed play at the same time, so that they watched it at the same time.
Yeah.
Separately in their homes. so that sense of family, community, congregation, we were still able to kind of achieve for you know. But I mean, you know, they were incredibly. We managed to get the whole of the orchestra and our adult choir in the Bridgewater Hall, but they took up every seat separately. So right around the auditorium. So I mean, it will be a fascinating piece of social history in the future, those recordings, because you know, you will see how we had to innovate to
And when the audience started coming back,
Yeah.
you know, all the distancing within the hall of how many people we get in was a fascinating exercise.
And
2 shows a day, and
Trying to make.
Do you still use all those platforms, or you've stopped?
So the digital team are constantly performing, and in fact, of the original digital series, some of that's been repurposed. So our presentation of Stravinsky's The Soldier's Tale was picked up by the BBC, and they've recently shown that on BBC 4. It's available on the iPlayer for the next 11 months, I think.
Yeah,
So it was.
It's very good.
Yeah, it was a kind of a key part. You know, that was a very different sort of thing for us to present, and that it's great that that's had a life of its own subsequently, and that's then led us to think, well, can we do something else like that in the future?
So the other thing that came out of it, we gave the first performance of Hugh Watkins' Second Symphony, and that won a South Bank Award as a digital concert. So you know, as Martin's been referring to you all the way through this, is that the quality was really, really key. You know, that was recognised on the national basis of the quality that actually the Hallé and the system managed to produce during that time.
Great.
I think also from an educational point of view, we were able to produce a digital schools concert. You know, we know we had schools in Cornwall, in Kent, in Wiltshire, all the way through to Edinburgh, who were accessing. You know, we estimate that about 90,000 children saw that concert. So when Hallé for Youth, which is the repeat, we would normally play to about 7,500 a year, and then probably another 3,500 in Sheffield. The digital connection there was immense, and that's got us working on other, as it was, sort of more unique content, where we've been providing digital resources for schools based on similar ideas or different pieces and so on to do that. So you know, one of the positives I can say coming out of the pandemic was that development within our digital team and within the organisation to produce this unique content in a way that could go.
Yeah, I completely agree. I think we've all learned and taught ourselves how to use more digital marketing and digital social media and all those platforms. And I'm one of the main beneficiaries, because I don't think Atelier Crescendo would have survived without it. and the reach you've got is just far beyond Manchester. And I've got very few projects in Manchester. I work very not very much in Manchester. I work out just in the UK and outside as well, because all those platforms have got such a reach that is amazing, and we didn't know that all that potential until we got more interested in that.
Definitely.
Yeah.
It's great. So we're probably going to wrap up now, but what's the future of the Hallé?
Well, we're in a we are in a period of change. So
we are. It's a flexible ensemble.
Yeah.
I think that's going to be the future for us, as Martin, we both referred to. We've got chamber ensembles within the orchestra that are doing, do 8 concerts a season here. We've got these relaxed concerts with 26 players, no conductor. So we build the audience right into the players in a relaxed way. We do 8 shows of that a year. The opportunity then to take that around, the opportunity to expand what we do on the digital side. I mean, our digital team have just made a short 15-minute film, which we are yet to see. But it was
we're all
just
very excited about it,
exactly that. They sort of collaborated and
developed
in terms
and
of the scripts and all that. And so that's something would never have happened without, in a sense, the pandemic, because that's the way we've started to think on that front. So I think there's a lot more coverage on that. There's a lot more reach into the community, and that it's not just the fact that we think that's it has to happen, because
it's not to tick a box.
The very existence of the orchestra. And I go back to we've got to keep our musicians fresh. We've got to give them new challenges. We can't keep playing the same old stuff. So the repertoire is changing in the orchestra. We've got a lot more female composers from ethnic diverse backgrounds are receiving performance of their music. A lot more ethnically diverse soloists with the orchestra conductors and so on. And it's becoming a much more rounded system. And if I was still playing, I would really welcome that, because then you would escape the old not Beethoven 5 idea. So having that variety of music, taking the audience on that journey, is our future, and that's the way that's going to develop.
Yeah, and I mean, I suppose purely in personnel, we're at a period where during the pandemic, John Summers, who led the organisation for 20 plus years, he moved on, he retired. At the same time, our former head of artistic planning, Jeff Owen, he similarly retired. So they're 2 very important kind of strategic roles within the organisation. So David Butcher is our now chief exec, and Anna Hurst, who's head of artistic planning, bring a new momentum, new sense of direction, and a new energy, if you like, in those roles. We've just appointed a new Roberto Ruisi, who's our new leader of the orchestra. So he's very new in post, and again, that's kind of a key artistic position in terms of orchestral standard, I suppose. That's kind of the and he's a fabulous player, young violin player, and we're not too far away from the end of Sir Marc Elder's tenure. He's probably got it's a season and a half left in his current role as music director. So the process of succession planning is underway. And no announcements yet, and no decisions made yet, but that process is underway. So inevitably that will then also lead to some evolution of the organisation again.
Yeah.
So we're doing it from kind of an interesting new footing. We've got St Peters and our activities at Ancoats, which kind of are the kind of bedrock for the organisation now, alongside our long-standing and valued residency at the Bridgewater Hall. So we've got a brilliant place that we perform. We've got a wonderful place that we prepare. Interesting, activities happening out in the community, on the platform, with our ensembles. In terms of kind of our ability to make music. So the challenges for us are like the challenges for everybody else. The money is always kind of the most difficult thing for an organisation. Have we got enough money to do everything that we want to do? and the challenge for the organisation is to make that happen in all the ways that we can.
And how we bring the audience with us.
and bringing the audience with us. But those sorts of two things follow each other, don't you? If we get it right, the money will come. There's if we get the audience development stuff right, the money will come. So it's a really exciting time.
I agree. It's
a really exciting time for the organisation. As what I often say about the St Peters project, particularly, is when we talked right at the start about the history of the organisation, and you can't fit 165 years of history. So the 100 will be 165 in January of next year, and you can't underestimate quite how much of what you do has happened before you came.
Yeah.
So the fact that you get to be involved in a first after all that history is a really remarkable thing. I was saying to a friend of mine the other day that I work for an organisation that people write books about. They write histories about.
Yeah.
And so therefore, when you're involved in a first, I became very aware during the process of that there would be a chapter in the future about the St Peters project, because this is sort of a fundamental change to the organisation. So it's like, just make sure your chapter is, it's a good chapter. You come out of it well. You're well.
It's a good
received.
chapter, Martin.
Yeah.
It's a good
But I think that's not a bad pressure to have. To know that, and it's a good motivator to kind of do your best, make sure you do your best. So. So kind of having come through that, we're now in this a 21st century version of a 19th century organisation, and that's a remarkable thing. It's something we should be very proud of. So I think the future is exciting.
Very good.
But it's evolution and constant evolution, and I think that's where the Hallé all our predecessors must be applauded for their roles in getting us to where we are now, and our job is to make sure it's there for generations to come.
But just like Martin, we mentioned earlier with Barbarolli, picking up the orchestra around the Second World War, all these challenges have happened, and the Hallé has been all about change and representing its audience all the way through that, and today is no different.
Great. We're going to start our venue quiz.
Yeah. Correct.
You might be a bit biased, but
yeah.
So what's your... Oh, yeah, first of all, what's your favourite part of working at the Hallé? What do you prefer the most?
Do you know, actually, I was at something yesterday. It's the people that I work with are my favourite part of working at the Hallé. What we do is really important. And there are moments when I feel great privilege sitting in the concert hall, listening to the orchestra at their absolute best, and I think, this is my job, and aren't I privileged and fortunate to be in a position where as part of my job I get to enjoy this. But I've worked for the organisation for 18 years, and I've worked with some brilliant people in that time, and that fundamentally, if you're going to enjoy your job, you've got to you've got to be with people that you enjoy spending time with. If you get in that for that length of time. And we're very fortunate. I think we're very fortunate. We've got a brilliant group of colleagues who are all committed. They care, and I think that sees the organisation in good stead. So for me, my favourite bit is people. But I have favourite moments. I can think of moments in concerts or performances. I mean, Steve talked earlier about the relaxed concerts. We performed a concert for people who are living with dementia, and people who are living with dementia very recently, and that was a really inspiring day in work to see. Talked about earlier the power of music and the positive power of music on those people's lives. So, those you get these sort of privileged standout moments of kind of musical enjoyment, and then if you put that alongside working with great people, that's a very fortunate position to
definitely.
be in.
I'm going to echo that. I'm going to say exactly the same on that from with the people we work with. That is, for me, from a playing background, that's the players. One of the other sides to my sort of existence within this industry, if you like, is I chair the ABO the Association of British Orchestras Education Group. So I know educationally, in a sense, what goes on in the other orchestras. But the level of commitment from our players and the level of cooperation is not beaten anywhere else. And that says a lot about, as Martin says, the people we work with around us all the time. I've got particular projects. I mean, for me, the big project that we do that I absolutely adore is when we've got a hall full of children in the Bridgewater Hall playing with the orchestra or singing with the orchestra. That is really bonkers. It's absolutely really special because that's the future. That's where the players are coming from. That's where the audience is. And we've always had this policy of when anybody comes into contact with the orchestra, from Martin was saying about the quality, we give them the very, very best experience we possibly can. So they don't just come to a concert, they sing, they play, they dance with it. And hopefully they'll remember us in the years to come and come back to us.
Great. I like that. What's your favourite venue as a performer? Maybe it's more a question for Steve, isn't it?
Goodness me.
Well, I may be about to reveal.
Go on, Martin.
Yeah. Well, having played, so I used to sing when I was a boy. I was a boy, so I've sung a majority of the kind of big UK, certainly. But I suppose I probably mine is as a punter. My favourite venue as a punter is Manchester Apollo, which I love for gigs for rock and pop gigs particularly. I think it's a brilliant space. It's Art Deco, and it just feels, although it's a big room, it doesn't feel like a big room, and I really love it for shows there. So
two venues for me, both abroad actually. Dare I say it? The Music Verein in Vienna
Comes back very often.
was absolutely. I was really privileged to perform there. And the Concertgebouw in Amsterdam was a similar sort of thing. Those two places. Just in terms of the thrill, I think playing at the BBC Proms was special. In terms of Hallé, I mean, we loved the Bridgewater Hall, no question about it. Yeah. But to listen to the orchestra, I really loved the Royal Concert Hall in Nottingham. It's got a special warmth in the sound. I was fortunate just the beginning of this season, it was our 20th anniversary concert there, which is our opening concert, main concert of the season, which Sir Marc conducted, and we performed in Heldenleben, this big Strauss piece where, as Martin mentioned, our new leader, Roberto, did a huge great violin solo in that, and it was just magical. So, Royal Concert was quite special. But Bridgewater Hall is brilliant, of course it is.
It is, obviously. What's your favourite venue as a listener?
See, I've probably gone early.
Yeah. A favourite venue as a listener? Yeah, I'm going to say probably gone early again. I'm going to go to Nottingham for Hallé, really. Bridgewater on occasion, just depends where you're sitting, but certainly a Royal Concert Hall.
Okay.
Yeah. I mean,
actually, Stoke, Victoria Hall in Handley is a very special hall. The Hallé used to record there back in the Barbarolli's time, and it's quite small. It's relatively small, but if you want an orchestra to have impact and really you get the sense of a real impact, there's that takes a lot of beating as well. So pretty good, both those.
Could be an episode of the podcast organised with them.
There you go.
Yeah. I mean, I think as a listener. Experientially, I really love gigs at the Manchester Apollo. I think they're all amplified. I suppose acoustically, I don't think you can beat the Bridgewater Hall acoustically. I mean,
it is very well designed hall.
I'm always mindful not to take it for granted because we know that there are plenty of other concert halls elsewhere in the country that are well known as places to go to listen to music, but where the listening to music experience isn't as high quality as you get in the Bridgewater
It's quite
Hall.
bizarre in this nation that the two places where you wouldn't, if you want to go and listen to really good acoustics, you go to Manchester and Birmingham. You wouldn't go to London.
That's true.
Yeah.
And that's why there had been a new concert hall that was going to be built, but stopped.
There you go.
Yeah, and I suppose actually, if I were to sit and listen anywhere in the Bridgewater Hall, it would be in the gallery of the Bridgewater Hall. I would sit right at the top of the
I
house.
think you're right.
The sound up there
Special sound.
is so lovely.
Yeah.
It's so lovely.
What I like about the Bridgewater Hall is it seems so very accessible in terms of it's not too opulent as
No.
a building, and also it's very accessible from wherever you live
Transport.
within Greater Manchester, let's say,
Yeah.
or maybe slightly outside. But it's very accessible. But it's a really good quality concert hall. It
Well,
doesn't.
of course, its accessibility is probably part of its key in terms of the acoustic treatment, because they knew that the tram line was
Yes.
going directly opposite. So therefore, they had to account for that in the building of it. And
Yeah.
the springs on which it sits is a kind of a
Amazing.
key part of its identity acoustically, I think. So
They're enormous, yeah.
Yeah.
How about favorite place to rehearse? It's more as it's not necessarily as acoustics, but how convenient it is, how comfortable you feel.
I think St Peters, Hallé St Peters. I mean, yeah, we're biased, of course we are, but as Martin said, it's got an acoustic that applies to so many different things. It's multifunctional.
Yeah,
But when I've done small group stuff, as I've frequently done, particularly with the relaxed ensembles and so on, and you're trying to balance an ensemble, you get a very, very true picture, and it doesn't change that much with the audience. So I think it's a really good place to rehearse.
Yeah, I mean, I'm not going to answer that for myself because I don't.
Be a bit
rehearse.
biased.
But I think it's telling that we regularly receive ensembles from outside of the organisation here.
Yeah.
So particularly those within Manchester. So the Saffron Ensemble, Manchester Camerata, Manchester Collective, even the BBC Philharmonic have rehearsed here and have come back. So, and Cheetham School of Music ran a full week's course here. So we've provided. The thing I think I'm most proud of is that we've added an asset to the city.
Another art,
Yeah.
really good art. venue.
And there was a period where across all our spaces in a week we had all of the groups that I've just named in 1 week. Now, I was left with the feeling, well, where did they go before we were here? I think that we proved the need, we proved the necessity for the space, and the fact that they come back, we've proved the quality. I think that's kind of. I was talking with somebody from Manchester Camerata recently who's just returned to Manchester after a period away, and she was sort of singing the praises of our development here, in that it's made their lives much easier to know that they've got this facility that they can call upon. They like us had a nomadic existence and still do to a certain extent, but for certain projects we'll put that at St Peters because we know it will work for us,
certainly.
and I think that's really important. So yeah.
brilliant. Which venue would you like to perform, or would you love to perform? You've not performed in.
I've never performed in. It's a very, very good question.
If you had a dream.
Possibly Carnegie Hall, actually, New York, because it's a really special acoustic there.
In York?
New York.
New York.
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah, sort of Lincoln Centre,
Yeah.
any of that sort
Yeah,
of.
I think so.
Yeah, well, I think just performing in New York, full stop, would be very nice, wouldn't it? Yeah.
And obviously, last question is, who would you suggest as a guest? I'm gonna say one episode I'd like to organise is an episode with women conductors of different ages, because I've listened to a podcast a year ago, and it was with I can't remember her name. She's French, but she's a conductor, and she really struggled to be recognised and even pass the tests. And she had awful comments from male saying women couldn't conduct an orchestra for physical reasons.
Yeah.
So I'd really like to organise an episode, if it's possible, through the Hallé or anything.
Yeah, well, I'm sure
Have
Deliana
different generations.
Yeah.
Deliana, yeah.
So they can share their experience.
I can honestly say, and I know this is sort of broadcast and all that sort of thing. I have to, in my role, I have to work with all the assistants.
Yeah.
So that's from Ed Gardner all the way through to Deliana. And I can
Yeah.
honestly say that I think the best we've had is Deliana. Because she has got so much skill in terms of the level of performance she needs to work at. So she can do the really sort of high art, if you like, performances, and she can deliver on that, and the orchestra really respect her. But she's also brilliant with the children.
Yeah.
So she really she adapts that skill, which you have to do even more in the 21st century in a sense, to all the different levels of whatever you're performing at. She's a natural at just fitting where that needs to. So she's the best.
Great. Well, I'll be
Yeah.
in touch with that.
Yeah.
So yeah, who would you suggest?
So we
Best go through Naomi, probably, wouldn't it?
Yeah. To speak to her, so we can make that arrangement. Yeah.
Yeah.
So, but who would I suggest for you to talk to?
Yeah, if you before I said that comment.
Okay, so well, I was thinking about it before. I think it'd be Gavin Sharp and the team at Band on the Wall, who we work with very closely here, and they've just had an extension to a historic building.
Great.
So and you know, a similarly, you know, very different part of the music ecology of the city, but similarly passionate and brilliant group of people connected with it. You know.
Yeah.
So I think, you know, Gavin and his team over there, you know, they're really interesting. They've got this new development. I haven't caught up with them as much as I would have liked since they've opened. But I'm really fascinated to see how that's, you know, the extra space that they've created and the additional facilities that they've been able to kind of harness by not a huge sort of alteration. What I really like about what they've done with the extension is it still feels like Band on the Wall. Although it's a fair bit larger now, and they've got a better performance space. The stage is better. It kind of all feels kind of more put together. So they would be my
great guest.
Yeah. And alternative to them would be to speak with Sally Cook and Ben Powell, who've recently taken on the Sapphire Ensemble.
Okay.
Who regularly perform here at St Peters. They're a really interesting contemporary music ensemble, very scalable. Sometimes there's 2 of them, sometimes there's 18 of them. Ben's in as their music director, and Sally's come in as sort of their I guess general manager, sort of to run the whole organisation, which is a different model to the one that
would be very interesting to
so
know about.
that you know, they are in an absolute moment of evolution, and will collectively have a vision about where the organisation is going to go in its next volume, if you like. I think they've it's not a chapter for them. They've closed one book and they're now starting another, and I think an organisation that you know is much loved and has had considerable impact in a very quiet way on the world of music in particularly contemporary classical music in this city and beyond. What do they become, and what's their vision? And I'd be fascinated to sort of know what their thought processes are. So they would be 2 suggestions for you.
Good suggestions.
Thinking you might go and have a chat with Tom Redmond at Chet's. So he was a member of the Hallé.
Yeah.
And because you obviously, with Marc, you were questioning the sort of linkages between the systems and how that relates to the Royal Northern, Hallé or whatever. That might be an interesting conversation. He's a very interesting sort of guy. Partly because he's also a brilliant concert presenter and all the other aspects of the work he does.
Yeah, radio presenting.
Radio 3.
He's multifaceted, isn't he?
Absolutely, really interesting fella. And then I mentioned Jamie Sloan at the Museum of Science and Industry, just because we've just run a recent project with them with a load of school children with some science and music sort of concepts and crossovers. And he just seemed to be a very fascinating guy, very keen on different ways of working and so on. They're looking at working with us for February half term and how we can help articulate their spaces, particularly what's happening there. You probably know, but there's a lot of closed down spaces because they're rebuilding and redeveloping, all that sort of thing. And all they've got is the main hall open. But I thought a pretty fascinating sort of fella to talk about.
that sort of thing, and the development of the place as a space.
Yeah, definitely. Well, interesting. Well, thank you very much,
Yeah,
Steve
pleasure.
and Martin. Don't know how long that episode lasted, but it was all really interesting talks.
Great.
Good, thank you.
Thanks.
Thanks.
Cheers.